Enslavement trade did not begin with war. It began with trust. And what if I told you the greatest weapon is not a gun? The greatest weapon is conquer and divide. I am Joana. I uncover Africa's untold stories and help you heal through storytelling. So today I'm going to explore some comments that I've received, and one comment that really stood out. Why was it important enough to sell their people for it instead of killing all early white invaders like they would have killed any enemy tribe? So this person is talking about, why didn't Africans, the African kingdoms, the soldiers, the warriors, the people, why didn't they just kill the invaders instead of selling their own people, over to European colonizers? Now, this is a very good question in the sense that it opens up many aspects of our history. Now, when European colonizers came to the African continent, they didn't come initially as, we're going to conquer you, we want to enslave your people. No, Africa and Europe has had over 400 years of mutual trade. So it was all about trade, exchanging ideas, exchanging cultures. So they were friends. So that's why it's so important to be careful about who infiltrates your space. Do they understand your values? Do you actually know your values and how to safeguard your values? Because when people come in, first as strangers, then becomes friendship, then you have economic ties, you trade, you visit them, because there were delegations, for example, from the Benin Empire that went to Portugal. You visit them, they visit you. Before, how do you set in structures in place to keep your values in check, to keep yourself in check? So they came as traders, not as invaders at first. So it was gradually, as the trade began to expand into like the Portuguese, they started their first experiment on Sao Tome and had this first plantation there and realized how lucrative it was for them, but they needed manpower. So where were they to get the manpower? They could not use ships to bring their people over from Portugal or Spain. So what they did was to go to the nearest kingdoms, and now coming to the Benin Empire. You also remember that they came also with their own ideologies, their own religion, Christianity. So there was a time where one of the Benin kings, I think it's Oba Esige, became like one of the first Christian kings of the Benin Empire, and that caused trouble within the Benin Empire. There were lots of royals and dukes that were like, no, we have our spirituality. What is it that they're bringing? No, this new religion, we can't accept it. But the ideology of the Benin Empire was more or less like, there are so many different ways to serve the supreme being, God, Sanoboa. So this is just going to be an addition. So now these European colonizers, they're coming in with all their influence on different levels. Then another thing to think about is African societies, even though they were not built based on that domination and conquest ideologies and values, there were conflicts within African empires and kingdoms. Like if we say otherwise there was no conflict, then we're actually just saying that Africans are not humans and not capable of rivalry, right? There were conflicts, and most of the conflicts led to wars within the African continent, and there were captives that were taken, and these captives were actually integrated into society, or the ones that were not integrated, they had to face punishment. An example is the life of King Jaja of Opobo. King Jaja was an enslaved captive, but he grew to now become the leader of the Opobo Empire. These conflicts, they now became heightened when European colonizers realized that they needed manpower. This manpower could be got through captives, and these captives, you can get them through wars. So they instigated more wars, not only through the ideologies that were brought, but also through Christianization, also through making sophisticated weaponry available. So with cannons, you can create more wars. With guns, you can create more wars, right? Another thing we can't ignore is also the greed. There are African leaders at that time, and even now, till today, that are so corrupt, like blinded from material wealth, that they are ready to actually go to war, create more captives, sell people, their own people. So Africans are just humans. We have to realize that. And that's why history is so important, because history shows us this, teaches us this, and makes us, maybe we can become more cautious. But well, let's see in 2 centuries what our children will be asking, like, what were we doing? Why did you allow these wars to happen? So let's be very, very cautious as we explore history, reflect on what happened and how we can move forward. Now, an example of such leader was Seriki Abass Williams. Now, his story is a bit different. He was captured as a young boy and then taken to Brazil, trained as an enslavement merchant, sent back to now what we call Nigeria, that's around Badagry. And he now became the enslavement merchant, like the middle person between the European colonizers and his indigenous people. So if you want to follow up on that, I think I'm going to make a video on that, because I actually went to the Seriki Abass Museum in Badagry and explored and researched and looked at this place. You can actually see some of the atrocities and the legacy that was left behind. So these leaders were bestowed with wealth, titles, territories, space as territory. Like the European colonizers capturing spaces, buying spaces, giving wealth to these leaders to be able to acquire more territory and space. So they became lead figures in the societies, and now being middle people for European colonizers. Does this still happen today? So we have to look at the system that had existed like centuries ago. They are still upheld right now in this modern days, just with other names, other forms, other titles, with paper agreements, right? It's so important to understand why enslavement trade even flourished, right? You had the influx of European colonizers with their demand, infiltrating spaces, and infiltration is not only by force. Infiltration, subtle infiltration through ideologies, concept, enticement, that has more power than even conquest and force, right? Then you had the greedy leaders that played along. So these are the aspects that I saw in history that really prompted that the enslavement trade could flourish. And European colonizers did not end the trade because all of a sudden they had conscience. No, because they just felt and realized it was even more profitable to exploit Africans on the continent rather than even transporting them outside the continent, because there are so much resources and someone has to work on getting out those resources and processing it for the global village that we live in. So thank you for that question. I'm going to explore more in this line of thought and research. So don't forget, I want to know your thoughts. Drop your questions so that we can expand deeper in this conversation. I am Joadre. I uncover Africa's untold stories and find ways to healing through storytelling.